Chicago in the 1930s was a city that never slept and never quite breathed easy. The skyline rose sharp and proud against a sky that was never clean, with buildings like the Wrigley Building and the Tribune Tower piercing the horizon, their stone facades glowing in the hazy light of dawn. Smoke poured from factory chimneys and steam locomotives, curling upward in thick gray plumes that blended with the low clouds hanging over Lake Michigan. The air carried the sharp tang of coal smoke, the metallic bite of steel mills down in South Chicago, and the faint, sour edge of the Chicago River drifting through the streets like an unwelcome guest. Vintage cars, Fords, Chevrolets, Packards, rumbled along Michigan Avenue and State Street, their engines coughing in the cold, while red and cream streetcars clattered on tracks, bells ringing sharp and urgent as they turned corners. People moved in long coats and wide-brimmed hats, women in cloche hats and fur collars, men in fedoras pulled low, everyone bundled against the wind that came straight off Lake Michigan, biting and restless, carrying the smell of winter iron and distant snow. The city felt tense but alive, a place where opportunity and peril walked the same sidewalks, where the hum of industry mixed with the whispers of secrets. America during the Great Depression was a nation on its knees, with millions out of work, banks failing, and farms turning to dust in the Midwest. But Chicago, tough, gritty Chicago, kept moving, its people hustling through the hard times with a resilience born from generations of immigrants and laborers. Chicago was a city of dreams and danger, as one old-timer put it, a place where fortunes could be made or lost in a single night, where the roar of the L trains overhead drowned out the cries of the hungry, and where the lights of the Loop promised something better, even if it was just an illusion. Prohibition began in 1920 with the 18th Amendment, but by the 1930s it had changed Chicago in ways no one could have imagined. Alcohol was illegal across the United States, a noble experiment gone wrong, turning beer and whiskey into contraband and ordinary citizens into lawbreakers. The government rules changed daily life in profound ways. Parties went dry on the surface, but the thirst for liquor only grew. Hidden bars and secret clubs sprang up everywhere, from the basements of legitimate businesses to the attics of private homes. Speakeasies opened behind unmarked doors, in basements beneath legitimate businesses, above laundries, behind barbershops, in warehouses along the river. You knocked twice, whispered a password through a sliding panel, and stepped into a world lit by dim lamps and thick with cigarette smoke and the low thrum of jazz. Tables crowded close. People gathered quietly at night, dressed in their best. Men in double-breasted suits, women in beaded dresses and cloche hats, laughing a little too loud, dancing close because the world outside felt far away and dangerous. Social life moved underground, hidden behind heavy curtains and secret entrances. Chicago became the undisputed center of that secret nightlife. The city that had once been known for stockyards, railroads, and steel now became famous for its hidden bars, its bootleg whiskey, its music that never stopped even when the law tried to shut it down. Families who once shared a beer at dinner now hid bottles in cellars or false walls. Weddings and celebrations went dry on the surface, but the real party happened later, in whispers. Jazz music played behind closed doors, saxophones wailing low and sultry, pianos thumping out rhythms that made you forget the empty pockets and the long lines for work. The Volstead Act enforced the ban, but in Chicago, it was more like a suggestion. Federal agents raided speakeasies, smashing barrels with axes, but new ones opened the next day. The underground economy thrived, employing bartenders, musicians, drivers, and lookouts. Women, who had just won the right to vote, found new freedoms in these hidden spaces, sipping cocktails and dancing the Charleston without the old rules. Prohibition didn't stop drinking, it made it exciting, dangerous, and profitable. By the early 1930s, the failure was clear. Crime had exploded, and the government lost millions in tax revenue. But in Chicago, the era defined a decade of shadows and secrets. The gangsters rose with Prohibition. They became powerful figures in the city, their names whispered in both fear and fascination. Men in sharp suits, long overcoats, and fedoras moved through the streets like they owned them. Luxury cars, long, black Packards and Lincolns with running boards and white wall tires, pulled up outside theaters, restaurants, and hotels. Secret meetings took place in back rooms, in hotel suites at the Palmer House or the Stevens, in warehouses along the river where crates of illegal liquor arrived by night. The media could not get enough of them. Newspapers ran front-page stories with bold headlines, photographs of men in double-breasted suits staring into the camera with calm, unreadable eyes. Chicago gained a reputation as a dangerous city, a place where wealth and violence walked side by side, where Tommy guns rattled in alleys and headlines screamed about the latest shooting or raid. Yet the gangsters were not the whole story. They were part of a larger picture, a city where power shifted quickly and ordinary people still went to work every morning, still raised families in cramped apartments, still tried to survive the depression with whatever dignity they could hold on to. The gangs influenced neighborhoods and businesses, controlling speakeasies and protection rackets, but they also donated to charities and churches, creating a complex image in the public's mind. Their fashion, tailored suits, polished shoes, silk ties, became a symbol of success in a time of poverty. Bootlegging routes ran from Canada down the lakes, trucks rumbling through the night, drivers dodging cops on dark roads. Rivalries simmered between groups, leading to turf wars that made the papers but rarely touched the average citizen. The law was often in on it, corrupt cops taking bribes, judges looking the other way. It was an era of moral ambiguity, where the line between criminal and businessman blurred. Historians note that Prohibition created the modern organized crime syndicate, and Chicago was ground zero. But to keep this historical, remember, these were real people in a real struggle, not just legends. The violence was tragic, the power fleeting, and the era ended with many in prison or forgotten. Ordinary life in 1930 Chicago was hard, but it had its own quiet dignity. Workers streamed out of tenements and row houses every morning, heading to factories in the stockyards where the smell of meat and blood never quite left the air, to steel mills on the south side where the heat from open hearths could be felt blocks away, to printing plants and garment shops downtown where sewing machines hummed and ink stained fingers. Immigrant families, Polish, Italian, Irish, Mexican, black families moving north in the Great Migration, settled into crowded apartments and neighborhoods. Rooms were small, walls thin, kitchens shared between families. Street markets filled the air with the smell of fresh bread from Polish bakeries, roasted chestnuts from Italian vendors, fish from the lake sold off wooden carts. Small shops lined the corners, grocers who knew every customer's name and extended credit when times were tight, butchers who cut meat to order and wrapped it in brown paper, tailors who mended suits for pennies. Children played in alleys and on sidewalks, jumping rope on cracked concrete, playing stickball with broomsticks and rolled-up socks, their laughter echoing off brick walls. People struggled. Many stood in bread lines. Many took any job they could find, shoveling coal, washing dishes, selling apples on street corners. Yet there was hope. Neighbors helped neighbors with a cup of sugar or a place to sleep. Families gathered around radios at night, listening to Amos and Andy or Fibber McGee and Molly, sharing the little they had, laughing together in rooms lit by a single bulb. Soup kitchens run by charities like the Salvation Army offered hot meals, the steam rising from pots carrying the smell of beans and bread. Women took in laundry or sewing to make ends meet, their hands rough from work. Men rode the rails looking for jobs, sending money home when they could. The Depression hit hard, banks failed, jobs vanished, evictions were common, but Chicagoans kept going. They formed unions, protested for better wages, and found joy in small things like a Sunday picnic in Grant Park, where the lake breeze carried the scent of popcorn and fresh air. Jazz was the heartbeat of the city. Clubs along State Street and the South Side stayed open late, doors guarded by doormen who knew your face. Live bands played swing music that made your feet move before you even realized it. Saxophones wailed, trumpets soared, pianos thumped out rhythms that pulsed through the floorboards. Singers stood under spotlights, voices rich and smoky, while couples danced close on small, crowded floors. Radio stations broadcast the music across the city, bringing it into living rooms, into tenements, into cars parked along the lakefront. Newspapers shaped public opinion, their pages filled with stories of crime, politics, survival, and the latest jazz sensation. Chicago was a cultural hub, a place where music, art, and ambition collided every day. The contrast between rich and poor was sharp. Luxury hotels downtown with crystal chandeliers and orchestras, bread lines a few blocks away with men holding tin cups, but the music belonged to everyone. It drifted out of open windows, filled smoky rooms, gave people something to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Artists like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington played in clubs like the Grand Terrace, the air thick with smoke and the scent of whiskey. The Black Belt on the South Side was alive with talent, where young musicians honed their craft in jam sessions that lasted until dawn. White audiences crossed lines to hear the music, bridging divides in ways the law couldn't. Radio shows like The Breakfast Club brought entertainment into homes, the crackle of the speaker carrying laughter and songs. Theaters on Randolph Street showed vaudeville acts, the smell of popcorn and candy filling the lobby. Chicago's World's Fair in 1933–34, a century of progress, brought hope with its exhibits of future wonders, the lights reflecting off the lake at night. The cultural life was a respite from the hardship, a way to forget the empty stomachs and the cold winds. The city itself was a marvel of architecture and industry. Tall buildings rose in the loop, early skyscrapers with stone facades and intricate details, their windows catching the light off Lake Michigan. The Wrigley Building gleamed white, the Tribune Tower with its Gothic spires stood sentinel. The Chicago River wound through the heart of downtown, bridges lifting for ships, the water reflecting the towers above, sometimes carrying the faint smell of sewage and oil. Train stations like Union Station and Dearborn Station were grand gateways, filled with the smell of coal smoke and the sound of steam whistles, porters in red caps calling out arrivals and departures, the marble floors echoing with footsteps. Industrial zones and warehouses lined the river, their smokestacks rising like sentinels, the clang of metal and the hiss of steam a constant background. Neighborhoods spread outward, downtown bustling with department stores like Marshall Field's and theaters along Randolph Street, suburbs quieter with tree-lined streets and small yards where families planted gardens and hung laundry on lines. Iconic streets, Michigan Avenue with its grand hotels, State Street with its department stores and theaters, Clark Street with its taverns and pawn shops, were lined with vintage signs, billboards advertising cigarettes, cars, movies, and the promise of better days. The L trains rattled overhead, their shadows flashing across sidewalks, the screech of metal on metal a symphony of the city. The lakefront was a place of escape, with beaches where families picnicked, the water lapping at the shore, the smell of fish and sand in the air. Parks like Lincoln Park offered zoos and conservatories, the scent of flowers in bloom contrasting the urban grit. Prohibition ended in 1933, and Chicago changed almost overnight. Legal alcohol returned. Bars reopened with bright signs and open doors, the clink of glasses and laughter spilling onto the streets. Nightlife moved above ground again. Gangster influence slowly faded, though the stories remained in headlines and whispered conversations. The city entered a new era, still tough, still proud, still moving forward. Breweries reopened, the smell of hops and barley filling the air. People celebrated in the streets, toasting the end of the dry years. The economy began to shift, with New Deal programs bringing jobs, building parks, roads, bridges. The gangs splintered, many leaders jailed or killed. Chicago looked to the future, hosting the World's Fair to show its progress. The end of Prohibition was a turning point, closing one chapter of shadows and opening another of cautious hope. Chicago was not just a city. It was a story, of dreams and danger, of struggle and survival, of music that refused to be silenced, of ordinary people building lives in extraordinary times. The 1930s shaped Chicago's identity in ways that still echo today. A city of contrasts, wealth and poverty, beauty and grit, hope and hardship. People chased success and survival in the same streets. They worked long hours, listened to jazz on the radio, raised children in crowded apartments, and dreamed of better days. And in the end, they endured. They kept going. They kept the city alive. If this glimpse into 1930s Chicago stirred something in you, maybe a memory of stories your grandparents told, maybe a curiosity about a time when the city felt both wild and alive, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep exploring these lost eras together.